The sun was blazing over a quiet, dusty town, a place where everyone knew each other's business and strangers rarely went unnoticed. But today, something was different. Inside a diner, the stage was set for a confrontation no one saw coming. A black man seated quietly, minding his own business, became the focus of a group of loud, arrogant men who had ruled the town with their hateful antics for far too long. What they didn't know was that the man they chose to target wasn't ordinary. He wasn't weak. He was a Marine, a retired fighter who had faced battles far more brutal than anything they could throw at him. What happens when prejudice meets power and a man trained to fight doesn't back down? You'll want to see how this unfolds. Mack Davis stepped out of his old pickup truck, its worn paintwork reflecting the relentless afternoon sun. He wasn't the type to draw attention intentionally, but his towering frame and broad shoulders naturally caught every eye. The Marine Corps cap resting snugly on his head hinted at a past of discipline and courage. He had come to this small town for peace, hoping to leave the chaos of his old life behind. As he walked the streets, the town seemed frozen in time, its charm overshadowed by his strange quietness. People glanced his way, brief, fleeting looks that lingered just a bit too long. This wasn't the welcome he had hoped for, but Mack wasn't one to let stares or whispers distract him. He had a plan, to rebuild his life on his terms. The diner stood at the edge of town, its neon open sign flickering against faded walls. Inside, the scent of coffee and fried food filled the air, a combination that should have felt inviting but didn't. Mack slid into a booth near the window, appreciating the momentary stillness. A waitress approached, her steps careful, her pen hovering over her notepad. "Coffee?" she asked. Mack nodded and added, "And whatever special you've got." His deep, calm voice carried the weight of someone used to commanding respect, though he wasn't trying to. Moments later, the bell above the door jingled. 3 men walked in, their laughter loud and obnoxious, cutting through the low hum of conversations. Mack glanced up briefly, just enough to register their presence. Their boisterous energy felt out of place, but Mack returned to his coffee, hoping they'd stay far from him. Leading the group was Derek, a wiry man whose swagger suggested he owned the room. His cocky grin and sharp eyes immediately locked onto Mack. Jake and Evan followed closely, their every move echoing Derek's confidence. "Well, look at that," Derek said loudly, his words meant for everyone to hear. "Big guy thinks he can just waltz in and take over." Mack tightened his grip on the coffee cup but didn't look up. He had seen men like Derek before, bullies who mistook volume for strength. Jake chimed in with a laugh, nudging Evan, who smirked as they closed in on Mack's booth. Their presence shifted the energy in the diner, turning the once muted conversations into uneasy silence. "Hey, big guy," Derek taunted, leaning closer to Mack. "You lose your way, or are you just passing through?" The room held its breath, waiting to see how Mack would respond. But he stayed silent, calm, his eyes focused on the table. It wasn't fear, it was restraint. Derek and his crew didn't know it yet, but they were about to push the wrong man too far. The bell above the diner door jangled loudly, breaking the fragile calm. 3 men strolled in, their entrance deliberately loud, their laughter cutting through the room like a blade. At the front was Derek, lean and wiry, his posture exuding arrogance. His eyes darted around the diner before locking onto Mack, his grin widening as if he had already chosen his target. Jake and Evan followed, their movements almost synchronized, their grins mirroring Derek's. Together, they carried the kind of confidence that came from years of intimidation, their very presence commanding attention. "Well, look at this," Derek said, his voice loud enough to quiet the murmurs of conversation. He motioned toward Mack's booth with a smirk. "Big guy thinks he can just take over our spot." Mack stayed still, his gaze fixed on his coffee cup. He didn't flinch, didn't react. Derek's words hung in the air, a challenge, but Mack's silence didn't waver. Jake leaned in closer, his grin turning mean. "What's the matter? Cat get your tongue? Or are you just too busy thinking about your next meal?" Their laughter filled the room, but Mack didn't budge. His calm presence unnerved them, though they didn't show it. Derek wasn't satisfied with silence. He took a step closer, his voice sharpening. "What's the matter, big guy? You too good to talk to us?" His tone was mocking, laced with provocation. Mack remained calm, lifting his coffee cup slowly to take a sip. His lack of reaction only fueled Derek's frustration. "Maybe he's scared," Jake added with a sneer, nudging Evan, who chuckled under his breath. "Or maybe he doesn't belong here," Derek continued, his grin returning. "This ain't a place for outsiders." Mack's grip on the cup tightened slightly, but he stayed silent. Years of discipline had taught him the power of patience. He wasn't going to give them the reaction they craved. His stillness, his refusal to engage, was its own kind of strength. Derek's grin twisted into something darker. "You know," he began, his voice dripping with false friendliness. "We don't get many like you around here. Big city type, huh? Don't think you'll fit in here." Jake leaned closer, crossing his arms. "He means black," he said bluntly, his grin widening as Evan snickered beside him. The words hit like a punch, their intent clear to everyone in the room. The other patrons glanced uneasily at their plates, unwilling to get involved. The waitress disappeared into the kitchen, leaving Mack alone with the three men. Mack's jaw tightened, but his composure remained intact. "Why don't you just sit down and enjoy your lunch?" he said finally, his voice calm but firm. "This won't end the way you think it will." Derek's laughter was sharp and grating. "Is that so?" he snapped, leaning closer. "You threatening me, fat boy?" His companions stepped closer, their demeanor shifting from mockery to menace. The tension in the diner was unbearable now, every second feeling like a countdown to something inevitable. Yet Mack didn't rise. He stayed seated, his calm demeanor steady. He wasn't afraid. He was waiting. And the gang had no idea what was coming next. Mack's hand rested on the edge of the table as he finally lifted his gaze to meet Derek's. His eyes held no fear, only the steady resolve of someone who had endured far worse. His voice was calm, deliberate. "I belong wherever I choose to be, and I'm not going anywhere." The room seemed to hold its breath. Derek's smirk faltered, just for a moment, as if caught off guard by the quiet authority in Mack's tone. But pride wouldn't let him back down. He leaned in closer, his words sharper now, laced with aggression. "Big words for someone who doesn't even fit in around here." Mack tilted his head slightly, his calm unwavering. "Fitting in isn't my concern. It's men like you who need to feel big by making others small." His words were measured but cut through the air with precision. Derek's bravado cracked briefly, but he covered it with a laugh, motioning to Jake and Evan. "You hear that? Big guy thinks he's better than us." The two men chuckled, but it was weaker this time, the cracks in their confidence beginning to show. Derek's grin twisted into a sneer as he leaned back, raising his voice for the whole diner to hear. "You probably came here looking for handouts, huh? Disability checks, food stamps. Guys like you are all the same." The room grew heavier with tension as Mack remained seated, his expression calm, his body still. He wasn't retreating, but he wasn't engaging in their chaos either. It was his quiet strength that unnerved them. "You don't know a thing about me," Mack said, his voice steady and firm. "But I know enough about men like you. You need this. You need to feel powerful in a room full of people too afraid to call you out. That's your weakness, not mine." The diner was silent now, every patron glued to the unfolding scene. Derek's confidence wavered again, his sneer faltering as Mack's words hung in the air like a challenge. He took a small step back, unsure of what to do next. Jake muttered something under his breath, trying to reignite the bravado, but it didn't stick. The gang had lost their grip on the moment. Mack hadn't moved from his seat, yet he had turned the tide entirely. As Derek stared at him, searching for a comeback that wouldn't come, Mack leaned forward slightly. His words were quiet, but they carried the weight of finality. "You've had your fun. Now it's time to leave." The bullies didn't respond. Their smirks were gone, replaced by uncertainty. They shuffled toward the door, muttering half-hearted insults that no longer carried the same bite. The tension in the diner began to dissolve as Mack turned back to his coffee, calm and composed. The room watched in awe, and though no one spoke, the message was clear. Strength doesn't always shout. It often sits quietly, unshaken. If you're inspired by stories of courage and resilience, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more powerful moments that remind us of what true strength looks like.